tells us we're dealing with ancient sites and advanced knowledge of sound frequency.
This is the most powerful antenna ever built, thousands and thousands of times stronger than any antenna before. And it can both send and receive cones on a metal plate. Pay attention to that structure. Somehow these guys were using cone technology with magnets and cone there, and this is the technology they used to manipulate humanity. Cone-shaped tools and ancient technology, once I started studying this, it blew my mind. It is a completely misunderstood and ignored part of ancient civilization. Cones in all ancient cultures, in South Africa, in England, in Egypt, cones everywhere. In Australia, this Mayan deity is holding 2 cones. The importance of holding 2 cones is really critical. I'll explain to you why I believe that is so. This guy's healing, this is a Sumerian statue, healing somebody with cone-shaped tools, cone-shaped hats used in special ceremonies. Wizards wear cone-shaped hats, and their wands are cone-shaped. And then obviously the cones of these ancient beings that were doing something to us, or humans. And those are not blood vessels in the dragonfly, those are hollow tubes, and the dragonfly doesn't flap its wings like a bird, it vibrates them and buzzes them. It's the buzzing of those wings, the sound of those wings that goes into the tubes, the hollow tubes, and at the bottom of those hollow tubes there are hundreds of tiny little cones. So the sound frequency goes out of the cones, creating these toroidal fields around the dragonfly's wings, putting them into a state of gravity-free zone around them because of the cone-shaped technology in their wings. This is the most powerful antenna ever built, thousands and thousands of times stronger than any antenna before, and it can both send and receive cones on a metal plate. Pay attention to that structure. Can you see the similarity between the bug's wings and that antenna? And the plot thickens. Everything that we do in science, technology, in development, it's all just mimicking nature, biomimicry.
Sound levitates. All ancient cultures talk about levitating things with sound. Not just sound, but also with mind and thought. Now, we hear about it all the time, but until you see something being levitated by sound, it's difficult to comprehend. Here's a beautiful example. Most of the stuff exists on YouTube.
And you can see the little ball settles down where there's a bright band, and that is the high pressure area. And I know it's a high pressure because you see there's a white band right next to the reflector, which is where the highest pressure will be.
Everything in physics, in science, in biology, everywhere manifests in toroidal fields. Everything is a toroidal field or a torus. Everything starts out as a torus, and especially sound. Sound being the primordial source of everything. It's really important for us to understand how sound manifests into toroidal fields, toruses, torus shapes like that. And this is why every time our heart beats, it creates a very powerful toroidal field around our bodies. And because sound does not stand still and sound moves, that moving sound that creates a toroidal field around our body creates a magnetic field, and that moving magnetic field creates an electromagnetic field around our bodies, all because of our bloody beating hearts. And then you got to ask yourself, what makes your heart beat? And doctors have no answers for that. The toroidal shape of sound, we're now starting to understand how every sound, the letters of the alphabet, the vowels, and even the consonants all have toroidal shapes. Everything manifests in a toroidal field. You cannot get away from it. And then the toroidal field of sound becomes a scalar weapon and turns into scalar technology. And even color manifests in toroidal shapes and toroidal fields, toruses. Color, because every color has a frequency to it, and every frequency is a sound to it. Every light frequency has a sound frequency attached to it, and therefore it is also a torus. The shapes in nature, the shapes in triangles, the shapes that we find in sacred geometry, how even those shapes have frequencies connected with them. Keep in mind how important logos are, how important symbols are that ancient cultures and occult organizations have. Every time you're looking at a logo or a symbol of some organization, you are picking up the frequencies, the sound frequencies that come through the light that travel from that shape. Do not think you're looking at something benign, that it has no effect on you. A shape or an image has as much effect on you as a sound frequency does. When you combine the sound with the image, this is why movies are so powerful, because now you got images and the sound entering your being. We are completely brainwashed and hypnotized into a sense of hypnotic existence, believing whatever they want us to believe, whoever they are, the puppet masters. Everything is just originates in toroidal fields of resonance, and it starts with the subatomic particles like the electron. Electron is simply a coherent resonance in a toroidal field, and this is really what an electron looks like, something like this. The torus model of the electron. Everything manifests in toroidal fields. Nothing is exempt from this. Atoms are toroidal fields. Atoms are not these crazy things that we're shown as atoms today, the atomic model that we get shown today. That is a complete, that's a theory. It has never been proven to be absolutely accurate. Here's a fascinating image of a molecular torus of the carbon monoxide, and you notice the similarity of this image, that they're creating a toroidal field going into the center, compared to the magnetic field in a cone shaped, because it seems that magnetic fields naturally form in cone shapes, because again, a torus from the top and from the bottom, there's a cone that goes into the top and a cone that comes to the bottom, and where the two cones meet, actually creating a toroidal field. So the magnetic fields of a torus actually take on a cone shape. And here's an image, cross-section of a magnetic cone. You can see the similarity. So toruses and cones are inextricable, becomes a very important thing for us to grasp. You cannot separate cone technology or cones and magnetic or toroidal fields. They're the same thing. That reminds us that the solar system is a toroidal field as well, and the galaxy is a torus. And so it goes from the electron, the atom, solar system, galaxy, the Earth. The perfectly balanced toroidal shape, or the balanced magnetic torus, looks like this. And once again, I think we've been fooled by being taught about positive and negative, because in the perfectly balanced magnetic field, there seems to be no positive and negative. It seems to be the same charge working in opposite direction. One coming from the top and the other one coming from the bottom. And this is really interesting, that needs to be discussed and investigated a lot more. So this is the torus spinning from the top down and from the bottom up in opposing directions, the same energetic field. And where they meet in the middle, where that bright dot is in the middle, that is what some people refer to as the 0 point, or as Nassim Haramein calls it, the vacuum. That's where you enter the infinite vacuum of the infinite density of creation. And we can thank Nassim for giving us the physics papers that show that the density of the vacuum is infinite. So therein lies the important understanding how sound moves faster than the speed of light, because the resonance and the sound frequencies that get sucked into the torus, that's what they do. They suck it in and they also give it out. Actually, what the torus does, it pulsates all the time. It pulsates like this because it's moving. Sound moves, so it pulsates, goes in and out all the time. So there's stuff going in and there's stuff coming out. Out of that infinite density, everything in creation seems to manifest. It is at that point that you get the accretion disk that is then spread out at the galactic torus, the toroidal galactic equator. Now, quickly, the denser the medium, the slower the speed of light. If you put light through a medium, the denser the medium, the more it slows down the light. The converse is true for sound. The denser the medium, the faster the speed of sound. That's why sound travels faster in water than it does in air. So how fast does sound travel in an infinitely dense medium? Infinitely fast. Every thought that you have is a frequency. Every word you say is a frequency. Every muscle, every move your muscles make is a frequency that creates an effect around you. Every time you think, you move, everything you do goes into the toroidal field that makes up your body, the atoms of the molecules of the muscles and everything in your body at the atomic level goes into that central toroidal structure of your atoms. It goes into that central point, or the vacuum, that infinite density, and from that it is available to everyone everywhere in creation. And this is why ancient people knew how to communicate with anyone everywhere across all space and time. because every thought you have is immediately available to everyone, everywhere, in all of creation. That's if our pineal glands are switched on. This is why I believe these bird-headed beings worked so very hard to destroy our pineal glands. That's starting to make sense. Otherwise, why would they spend so much time and energy and depict it? Destroy the pineal glands. We understand that it is the sound of the earth that creates the magnetic fields. The sound, the earth rings like a bell, right? It is not the molten iron core at the center of the earth that creates the magnetic field. It's another lie we've been told. Somebody came up with somewhere along the line, because molten iron doesn't have a magnetic field in any case. It has to be solid. And that brings us to identifying what the magnetic fields actually look like. Thank God for the ferrolens cell, which is discovered not that long ago. We can now see what the magnetic fields actually look like in a beautiful toroidal shape. This is what the magnetic fields look like in toroidal fields. And I believe that these are actually what Mr. Ley found, that are now called ley lines. He just really discovered the lie of the magnetic fields and the connectedness of all the magnetic fields on Earth, on the surface. What happens when you bring a magnet close to a ferrofluid? Something magic. Little tiny cones pop out, and you start seeing the interconnectedness between magnetism, cones, and toroidal shapes. You cannot separate those. Sound and magnetism effects in nature. It's all around us. You see how sound is responsible for pretty much all the shapes, and once you watch Hans Jenny Cymatics documentary, you realize how spectacular that is. When you put a ferrolens cell over a speaker magnet, we see something magic. Loads of tiny little cones facing the center. Does it remind you of something? Yes, it reminds me of this guy's wristwatch. Okay? Bingo. There you got it. Somehow these guys were using magnetics and sound and cone technology with magnets and cone there. Can't separate them. And this is the technology they used to manipulate humanity and many other things. Cone-shaped tools and ancient technology. Once I started studying this, it blew my mind. It is a completely misunderstood and ignored part of ancient civilization. Cones in all ancient cultures, in South Africa, in England, in Egypt, cones everywhere. In Australia, this Mayan deity is holding 2 cones. The importance of holding 2 cones is really critical. I'll explain to you why I believe that is so. This guy's healing, this is a Sumerian statue, healing somebody with cone-shaped tools. Cone-shaped hats used in special ceremonies. Wizards wear cone-shaped hats, and their wands are cone-shaped. And then obviously the cones of these ancient beings that were doing something to us, or humans. And this is important to realize. When Caesar technology was first introduced to us, only in 2009, this is when the cone-shaped technology becomes important, when sound is propelled into a Caesar beam. So what happens when you put sound into a cone? It speeds up, speeds up, speeds up. By the time it leaves the tip, it is moving faster than the speed of light. It becomes what's known as hypersound and a Caesar. That sound frequency enters the 0 point of the toroidal field, at which point it basically creates this infinitely fast Caesar beam. What happens to that Caesar beam? That Caesar beam is surrounded by incredibly powerful magnetic fields because of the toroidal nature of that Caesar beam. So now you got the Caesar beam that is surrounded by an incredibly powerful magnetic field. If you use this cone as a tool, you can channel your thoughts as a frequency, into your hand holding this tool, so you don't need any other source of anything. You just need yourself, your thoughts, and a cone. So you can channel your thoughts, and that the frequency of your thought gets channeled through the cone and becomes a Caesar beam. Your thought, the energy of your thought becomes a Caesar beam. So if you're thinking, I want to chop down that mountain, I want to cut that mountain, it's that thought, that energy goes into the Caesar beam. And this, I believe, how they did it, because there seems to be very little other evidence for this other than this. They thought, in fact, we have many channelings that suggest the same thing for those people that believe in channeling and shamanic information. So it was they used their thoughts through their hands into the cone, cut that mountain with my Caesar beam. Remember, you can't see a Caesar beam, so it's not very impressive. Laser beams are far more impressive, but infinitely less powerful. Caesar beam, cut the mountain off. And this is where you need a second Caesar beam, second cone. This is why that Mayan deity holding 2 cones. Because once you got two Caesar beams running, you got two powerful magnetic fields, and you can trap the tip of that mountain between the two magnetic fields. And this, I believe, how simple it should be. Because once you got this technology, you can pretty much do everything. And this is why we see giant ancient trees chopped down. How did they chop that giant tree down? Probably with a Caesar kind of technology. We have these beautiful cone-shaped tools in the Rosicrucian Museum in San Jose that are engraved with cuneiform text that tell us that these cones were used in the construction of the temples of Sumer. Now, how would you use a cone in the construction of the temple of Sumer? And one of them mentions the temple of Inanna being built with these cone-shaped tools. And then to the rescue comes Edleed Skalnin, the man that built Coral Castle, this incredible place at the southern Florida. And he was seen levitating those giant blocks with ice cream cones in his hands. And this is why I call it the ice cream cone phenomenon. Just like that Mayan dude with two ice cream cones, he was seen holding two ice cream cones levitating those giant blocks. I hope that this is starting to provide a body of interesting evidence of how this stuff works. And that brings us to dragonflies and other beetles and bugs whose bodies are too big for their wings. Those are not blood vessels in the dragonfly. Those are hollow tubes. The dragonfly doesn't flap its wings like a bird. It vibrates them and buzzes them. It's the buzzing of those wings, the sound of those wings that goes into the tubes, the hollow tubes. And at the bottom of those hollow tubes, there are hundreds of tiny little cones. So the sound frequency goes out of the cones, creating these toroidal fields around the dragonfly's wings, putting them into a state of gravity-free zone around them because of the cone-shaped technology in their wings. And the same for Viktor Grabinikov, the man who studied the bugs that were too big to fly, and then he learned how to use the bug's wings to build a levitation platform. He wrote a whole book about this. He built this levitation platform. Unless people know this technology, they think he's a crank. He's just talking rubbish. Well, I believe he's actually telling us exactly what's going on here. It looks like he had a motorbike handle on that device and just cranked up the frequency. And at some frequency, that sound through the bug's wings would have created that toroidal field around his little levitation device. He said that he moved faster than the speed of sound on that levitation platform. And because you've got this balanced toroidal field around you that he somehow managed to create, it wasn't dangerous. Then he started studying the bug's wings, and look at the image on the left here. Pay attention, very close attention to that structure there. And then we get back to the Taurus stones that emit powerful sound and frequencies. We've measured sound energies coming out of the Taurus stones, very, very powerful frequencies. Some of them give us up to 3,400 decibels of sound. That's very, very powerful stuff. Very high frequencies. You can't hear it, but it affects your body. Also, what I've been noticing is that these Taurus stones can act as intentional tools. If you put your intention into it, it amplifies your thoughts, amplifies your intentions, these Taurus stones. So they could be very good or very dangerous. And basically, like we said, it's scalar technology, scalar vortex, Taurus effect. As it goes in, it goes into that infinite vacuum, the density of the vacuum, and then creates a bigger torus around it. And this happens simultaneously because of that infinite density of that vacuum, that 0 point. We put one of these Taurus stones in a bucket of water. The next morning there were thousands of bubbles going around, spiraling into the center of the Taurus stone, Taurus and cone combination. This is built into our own human anatomy. We have this in our eyes. We have rods and cones in our retina. So at the back of our eyes we have like this laser dish that's catching all the light and the frequencies coming through our eyes from the front, and the cones are facing backwards in the retina and shooting, turning the sound and the frequencies of the light, turning it into Caesar beams, shooting it through the optic nerve into the pineal gland. Isn't that remarkable? That our retinas are like satellite dishes, amplifying the light and the sound frequencies and sending it to our pineal gland. Oh my goodness. And what's at the front of our eyes? At the front of our eyes we have not cones but toruses. We have beautiful toruses at both our eyes. Our irises are little tiny toruses with a lens in the middle that focuses the light and the sound coming through that with the light. This is just spectacular. This torus cone combination is all over in our own anatomy, and this is why we should be able to do this, all of us, and so much more. In 2017 November, the Saab Award, which is a big deal military award, Saab Science Award was won by this guy called Henrik Holter for developing a new antenna. It's called the phase ray antenna. It's a plate with a bunch of cones on it. Here's a close-up of it. It's the most powerful antenna ever built, thousands and thousands of times stronger than any antenna before. And it can both send and receive cones on a metal plate. Pay attention to that structure. Can you see the similarity between the bug's wings and that antenna? And the plot thickens. Everything that we do in science, technology, in development, it's all just mimicking nature, biomimicry. And this is why when we start looking at free energy, we should look at sound and magnetism. Unfortunately, Isaac Newton knew nothing about magnetism. This was a shock to the system when I discovered this. And this is why we have so much problems. But there's a lot more to discuss because Newton was a smart guy. I actually believe he was put up to writing that crap that we all teach our kids at school today. The whole Newtonian physics thing, just to distract us from what's really going on. And this is why gravity is completely nonsensical. We observe it, we can't explain it, we don't really understand it, and yet the whole effect of gravity is perfectly equally described by Coulomb. In Coulomb's law, it works exactly the same, except it's described as an electric phenomenon. And if it's an electric phenomenon, it means it must be an electromagnetic phenomenon, which means it's a magnetic phenomenon, which means it's a sound phenomenon. So, it's much easier to describe gravity as a magnetic effect. And suddenly everything becomes very, very clear. And we can explain everything about our reality. Sound creates magnetic fields, moving magnetic fields create electricity, and we live in a magneto-electric universe.